Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for another prototype. Check the description for epic alliteration. And of course, timestamps for our conversation today on my solo game design podcast. We are still focused on Cosmonarchy, in my opinion, likely the future of the RTS, at least in one way or another. Certainly the most satisfying real-time strategy experience that I personally have had. And, apparently I've got about 500 or so people on our Discord server who agree. We call them frauds. You too can become a fraud. Join us on Discord. You can also donate to project development via the coffee link. It's now in the bottom left, but it's also in the description. All right, enough shilling. Although, is it ever enough shilling? Ask Lucifirius about that. We're going to be kicking things off in today's conversation talking about Tyrant's Tale, the event that most recently concluded for Cosmonarchy, and I'll also be talking about game flow and general sort of observations about how Cosmonarchy has evolved, the meta, and different things like that, so that we can talk a little bit about some things that I want to see changed going forward. And in a second episode of Prototype that I will record this weekend, we will be going over a patch preview almost of the changes and essentially distilling or articulating how I plan on making the changes that I want to make. And so, you can kind of think about this as like a two-parter, with this part being about the tournament that just happened and the overall observations about the game and what we would like to maybe see changed. And I say we, talking a little bit, speaking for some of the community members, but also speaking on behalf of my co-contributor, Veek7, who is not present for this particular recording, but is somebody who I have been consulting with a lot for design and stuff. So that also contributes to the conversation in some ways. I will try to make it clear if I'm putting forward something that Veek himself disagrees with, but there's going to be some things that are definitely more things that he thinks that maybe I personally don't agree with, or maybe don't value as much or whatever. Either way, they've all filtered into the game's design. I've done my best to incorporate his perspective into the design, despite the fact that, maybe some of those ideas are run counter to what my ideas are. Just maybe it'll work. Maybe I'm wrong about my presumption or something, right? So anyway, I figured I would just give that little disclaimer. We will also talk about the mission pack for Tyrant's Tale and the format we've decided upon. I've been doing some dev streams about that lately, so that's pretty cool. And then we will close with the community roundup and the coffee questions. We have 6 coffee questions today, so that will undoubtedly end up being a chunky portion of this podcast. So there you have it, a little bit of an intro, a primer, a table of contents for what to expect. Tyrant's Tale was a pretty epic event, and I've actually prepared the graphics that we saw on stream for seeing the way that the tournament went. We'll first take a look at the upper bracket here, which is going to involve seeing Hit 'em Up over Veek7 in the quarterfinals, and then eventually over Shambler, who went over Arbuz Budesh in the quarterfinals. In the semifinal, Hit 'em Up took down Shambler. Hit 'em Up took down Top Ramen in the upper final, who had taken down Mystery Meat, who had taken down Neblime. And Top Ramen himself had taken down Hamster earlier. And then Hit 'em Up took down Top Ramen again, which means if we tab on over to the lower bracket, you'll see that, unfortunately, my brother in arms there, Veek7, was not able to pick up a win versus Arbuz. He picked up one win in the whole tournament, and it was against Hit 'em Up. So, hey, that counts. That counts for something. But he didn't end up making it deep into the tournament, unfortunately. I'd switched from random to Zerg from the qualifier to the main event and wasn't able to make it happen with his Zerg. Arbuz Budesh somehow making it past not just Veek, but Mystery Meat as well in a very tight 5-game series. And on the other side of the bracket, Neblime defeating Hamster without too much of a problem, defeating the Shambler with also not too much of a problem. He did try to proxy a sort of Warden rush, the official equivalent of cannon rushing in Cosmonarchy, but it didn't end up working out. So that was the game that was dropped. And then Neblime narrowly avoided being just clean swept by Arbuz and then reverse swept him to make it to the lower final. But Top Ramen put an end to our Australian Protoss and closed things out, which puts us back at the grand final there, as you can see. So that was essentially the very abridged version of the story of the Tyrant's Tale. But the Tyrant has been crowned, right? Hit 'em Up has taken center stage. And it's kind of interesting, too, philosophically, or maybe in terms of like the thematics of going into the idea of it being called the Tyrant's Tale. It kind of worked out really nice because Mystery Meat, the Return of the King looking really deadly, sending Neblime to the lower bracket very quickly. And then, narrowly avoiding a rematch against Neblime again in the lower bracket by not being able to make it past Arbuz was quite surprising, I thought. And then obviously that means that Arbuz takes down Mystery Meat. That's kind of like, what the hell's going on there? That's something kind of new. And then obviously Top Ramen taking down Neblime. Arbuz almost taking him down. Like, we almost had it so that the top 3 of the tournament were all new-ish players relative to they were relative newcomers. You compare that to the original crew of Mystery Meat, the Shambler, and Neblime, who I think it's safe to say that they've achieved OG status by now. Obviously, Veek7 was also there in the way before times, right? I don't think he was that super active in the tournaments like super long ago. You're talking about like the very first Ascensions and stuff. I don't think that he played too much. I think his debut might have been in the 4th one, but I could be wrong about that. So yeah, he was very busy during the initial incarnation of the tournaments. It's pretty cool though. If you go back and look at those on the channel, it's a wild world, and we don't really know what the hell we're doing whatsoever, but it's still pretty fun. And Hamster, I guess, is also a little bit on the OG side. He's kind of like intermediate status when it comes to that because he showed up for Ascension 6, and so he missed the bulk of the Year 1 tournaments, but he's been here for all of the Year 2 tournaments, so that's been pretty cool to see. And then we had, just the fact that the Shambler didn't make it super deep. Neblime did make it to the top 3, but only narrowly. And Top Ramen was denied him the opportunity to go up against Hit 'em Up. That was a matchup I did want to see because I feel like maybe the fact that Neblime seems to play cooler when it comes to tournament games than other people do, and Hit 'em Up seems to play worse than he does in practice. I thought both of those were interesting, like counter proposals that might have been able to mesh together for a surprise Neblime victory, or at the very least maybe a close series. Top Ramen, these games were a little bit closer than they might look if you just see 4-1. Particularly, I want to say the Rage Slave game that closed out the whole set. Top Ramen was behind kind of early on, and he fought back for a very long time, making it very difficult for Hit 'em Up to close. Obviously on Maxium, Top Ramen did score a win, which is better than he did in the upper final. So that was also really cool. Just in general, I think we had some really epic series in this tournament. The ones that obviously come to mind are, of course, the 5-game series, which is like Top Ramen Hamster. I would even say the Mystery Meat Neblime series. The Cold Sweat game that Neblime picks up in the quarterfinal number 4 isn't super great in isolation, but the other 3 games, all of which were Mystery Meat wins, end up being pretty interesting macro games to go back and watch, and feels like it's kind of on the knife's edge, where the question is just like, can Neblime come up with a response to Mystery Meat's composition? And the answer seems to be no, but like, it's not like the answer to that question was super easy, immediate, all caps, definitive exclamation point no. It was more like no question mark. Okay. And then, like eventually the Mystery Meat gets it across the line kind of thing. So thrilling games, I would say. And when you have a series like that, I would say this is also the case for the Hamster Ramen set that went 5 games in quarterfinal number 3. I feel like those are the kinds of things where it's okay to have a game here and there that's like shorter or more one-sided or more of a statement, because it's almost in a way you're thinking to yourself like, okay, this is interesting, right? Like we have the opportunity to see that like these players are willing to do some wild experimentation, or they have different strategies in their pocket. It wasn't really the same dynamic, but it kind of reminds me of when I think it was a game on Citadel this is last ASL, between Sulky and Snow. And it was a game where Snow like really had no right being in the game. A similar thing happened on Blitz Y as well, where like both games, but there was something about like the play style or whatever that Snow adopted on the Citadel game, where like it was really gambly, bold, and you wouldn't expect a player like Snow to do that, and he did it. And like, even though Sulky wins the Citadel game, like he's like almost shook because of the fact that that strategy went through, and it's a long series. I think it might have been a best of 7, and so he's got to deal with the fact that Snow could do this at any point in the next little while. You know what I mean? Like this is actually something that I've got to worry about. And so that kind of dynamic was there in a few of these matches where it's like, oh damn, like, sure, I've got a little bit more runway to go when it comes to the series. It's not over yet just because I dropped one game, but because I dropped that game in that way, or because I won that game even, but like that strategy was so surprising to me, like now I've got to factor that in, and it almost changes the whole conception that you have of what your opponent is capable of. Those are the kinds of things that I think really set series apart from individual games. And so, yeah, it's one of those reasons why I've been playing around with the idea of like, do we need longer series in the Cosmonarchy tournament stages, right? If we think about, I just realized it says Acropolis #2 in this picture. It's actually supposed to say Tyrant's Tale, but, a classic move. I just have the old, I didn't edit the sigil back after, going back and resetting this. So just give me one moment to fix that. All right, that was a classic moment there. I wonder how many people are going to have noticed that if they end up even looking at the video for this stuff. But yeah, so the Tyrant's Tale, though, like it has some moments for that, and I do feel like maybe there would be more room for that if we made the series like, if we increase the number of best of 7s that we had. Should the grand final still be the only best of 7? Should we maybe make the lower final that way as well? I mean, that was something that actually Neblime wasn't sure if the lower final was a best of 7 or not. Like, he asked that question a few times. I think maybe some other people did as well. And so I don't know, like sometimes when you ask a question like that, it's just because you forgot, but other times it's like plausible, would make sense, that kind of thing, and it makes you think, wait, yeah, maybe it just should actually straight up be a best of 7, like that's a thing. And so yeah, looking at this bracket, if we go back to the lower bracket, would it have been good for this to have been a best of 7? Maybe we would have gotten just Top Ramen for winning him, but maybe Nebline would have made it a bit closer or something like that. I'm open to those kinds of suggestions. I'm open to those kinds of thinking. So I definitely feel like there's room for that sort of thing in the future. I also am not 100% sure about this, but I was thinking recently about whether or not we should have like tiebreaker matches. So by that I mean, technically, if you look at the people who are eliminated in 1A and 1B here, Veek and Hamster share 7th to 8th place in the tournament. It only had 8 players, so they are joint last place in their exit. But you could theoretically have a 7th place decider match where these two players duke it out in a best of 3 or best of 5 or whatever. I was thinking maybe best of 3 would be good for these tiebreaker matches because it's like truncated and like they can't progress further in the tournament. It just determines their final placement, and that's better for ranking and for I guess providing more matches if that's something that we want. And it's better for a number of reasons. The problem that you get with situations like that, as I've observed it in other competitive gaming events and competitive tournaments in general, regardless of if they're related to like video games or not, is when there's nothing to play for when it comes to your progression in the tournament itself, it starts to feel like most players will end up phoning that in, like they just won't care. And you'll even get situations where if it's allowed, the player will just forfeit and declare that they exited 8th place. I guarantee you there would be some players, like some names immediately come to mind for that actually, where if they were eliminated and they could not progress further in the tournament, even if there might be a little bit of prize money on the line or something, even if there might be some ranking points on the line or whatever, that's the kind of thing that really wouldn't motivate you unless it was a decent chunk of cash, right? So if we had like the difference between finishing 7th place versus 8th place was like $1,000 because we have like a $10,000 tournament and can afford to do that. Although I don't know, it would have to be more than that if at the current price shares. But that would be like one case where like, okay, well, $1,000 is on the line, I'll do that, or even $100 would probably motivate somebody to do that and to try difficultly or really put their all into it, I guess I would say. And so that's the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, is that really going to be the case? I don't know. Like, these are interesting questions to be to have, and I'm just not sure if. I'm not 100% sure if that's something where the way that things go, do we need that? Do we need that tiebreaker match? It's just another format thing that I'm sort of jogging in my head, like thinking about. but like I don't mind if people exit 7th to 8th, or in the case of Mystery Meat and the Shambler, they exit joint 5th to 6th. But like I think, for example, the Hamster versus Veek set, maybe Hamster wins that. And that might be a close one if it were to happen for a tiebreaker. And I think Mystery Meat probably beats the Shambler in a set like that. And so, but I can't like use that. That's just a thought exercise. I can't use that for anything. I can't use that presumed understanding of how the game like progressed or whatever, and how these players stack up against each other, because it's not actual. It's just, prognosticated, I guess. It's just me thinking about it. So I don't know. It might be cool. Maybe there'd be something that would be interested in that. Something that we did for the first time in Tyrant's Tale was we did a show match, and that show match was Mystery Meat versus Arbuz. Thinking, I had initially said, hey, Neblime, if you don't make it to the grand final, then after the lower final is cast from replays, would you be interested in being available? And he initially said he would try to make himself available for that, but then he got pulled away for some work stuff or whatever, which I guess is a good thing. He didn't actually have to play the grand final. I mean, I guess I kind of leave that to the scheduling stuff, to the players and whatnot. They can tell me, like, does this day work for you or whatever? And they kind of know that if I'm asking that, I'm like, if you say that day is fine, then at the very least, I just don't know if, maybe that's actually what Neblime did. Maybe it was one of those things where he's like, yeah, I'll just say I'm available. That way, like, he doesn't get spoiled the result or something. I don't know. I'm just spitballing shit. But it's kind of interesting anyway to throw that around as an idea. The show match was really cool, though. I thought I enjoyed the show match. I didn't really put it on the bracket over here or anything, so we don't have it listed here. But actually, I can use this opportunity to show we do have a Reddit for Cosmonarchy. If I go to, what is it, old.reddit.com. It's R. There you go. We do have a Cosmonarchy subreddit, and I did end up posting the post-match discussion for some of these matches. And we have Mystery Meat 2-0 Arbuz Budesh. The flags are there if you're watching on mobile or looking on mobile. And then there's Mystery Meat wins the show match. Discord server members voted for the maps and game modes. And then we see it was Main Street, The Turning, it was Lunatic Fringe Massacre, and it was Chick Stealer Omnipresence was up next, or up third, if it went the full distance. I think in the future, we'll probably play out every single map in a show match. We kind of had to pull an audible on this, or call an audible on this, in the context of, like, Hit 'em Up wasn't sure how much longer he would be able to stick around when it comes to the grand finals, and we were playing that live, not from replays. So yeah, that was something that we had to deal with. But down here I have, like, the map VOD. Ideally there'd be something like maybe some kind of description we could put here of the match, or some other statistic we could throw down, like maybe the match length or something like that. I don't know. Not 100% sure. I mean, you're spoiling the outcome, so it's fine to probably talk about the length. But yeah, I don't know. There might be some other things that I can think about, or that you guys can think about and post in the comments or whatever, that I can include in these post-match discussion threads. They're based off of, like, the Global Offensive is the one that I always look at. If we scroll down until we see something, maybe it's still here. I don't know. A tournament just ended, so I'm kind of surprised there's not a post-match thread on here, but it's probably on the next page if I go there. Yeah, here it is. So I'm used to seeing stuff like this, where you have, like, I don't know how to get the pictures of people, or I would upload their, like, avatars or something, their Discord pictures or whatever. But yeah, they have this stuff, and these link to the HLTV profile, which is like a separate website that houses all of that information. And they have the stat line of, like, here's how the matches went, which is sort of what I emulated. If you go to, like, the Hit 'em Up Top Ramen Grand Final instance, it says Impetus, and who won, and then Maxium and who won, and so on. So it's kind of like this over here, except the score line is, like, indicating which team took it, like whichever team is on the side of the 13 is the one who took it, unless there's an overtime. And then they've got the map picks. These are a little bit fancier than what we've got, because what we've got, we don't include the map images, but we do have, which one was picked and which one was banned. Obviously, because Hit 'em Up was in the upper bracket, he got to ban a map and pick the first map, and then they went back and forth until they had the whole veto out, and then we did the whole thing like here. So and these link to the time-stamped section where the map actually begins. So I think that's actually pretty cool. The Counter-Strike threads usually end up showing like stuff like one of the things that the Counter-Strike threads typically show is like player stats and stuff. Since we don't have like a team game or whatever. I don't really have stats that I can pull without like painstakingly going back and looking at maybe like the score screen or something. Maybe I could do something like that. I don't know. It really depends on like what people think would actually be useful at a glance. And obviously something that would be really nice to be able to do in the context of, you know, a new engine or whatever is be able to have our replays be decoded into stats that we could easily interpret, and then say like, yeah, this player was really good at this thing, or like high impact on a team or something, you know, like figure out some way to do that automatically. But that's like way into the future. But yeah, show match was pretty good, pretty cool. I do think in the future we'll play all of the maps. And the show match being live makes a lot of sense too. I like that idea. When it comes to the, like, is there going to be a prize for the show matches in the future? I don't know. Are there going to be more than one show match in the future? I also don't know. I was thinking maybe one of the things we could try to do is we could have a show match at the end of the group, like the battlements phase or whatever. And that would basically be like, you know, to send the battlements phase off, to kick it off or whatever. We could have the players who who did not make it out of the battlements, throw them into an FFA and just cast that. That could be kind of interesting. I do think there's definitely potential for that. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully we can come up with something like that that ends up being really good and really neat, I guess. But I'm definitely thinking that one of the things we want to try to double down on is just generally making it so that there's a little bit more, if you're thinking about like Acropolises and stuff, I would like it so that once you're eliminated, you still have a chance to be, you know, show up on the stream at some point if you're so interested, if you're so inclined. Like, one of the things that I do regret a little bit is that, especially since General Anakin had to forfeit out of Acropolis #1's playoffs, the throne room stage, in the like all the way back in like, what was that, March? It would have been nice to get him in a show match type deal, you know, at some point later on, right? And so it could even be that like whoever is like, imagine in a tournament like this, if we go back to the lower bracket stuff, imagine if Arbuz Budesh at being eliminated last, right? Or maybe it would even be like, okay, Nebline was eliminated like in third place, Arbuz was in fourth place, so they become team captains, and Nebline drafts a player onto his team, and Arbuz then picks the next player. But maybe Arbuz picks the next two players, and then Nebline gets whoever's left over. So it's sort of like snake draft in a way. And then you have a 3v3 show match, right? That could be kind of interesting. So like in such a situation, I imagine it would be like Nebline picks Mystery Meat and Arbuz picks like, I don't know, Shambler Hamster, and Nebline gets Vik as the last player. And like then they 3v3 it out on a show match and see what happens. Like, you know, obviously barring any stability concerns, that would be a really epic show match. And that could be something that we do in the future. Although I also liked the 1v1 with game modes thing and the voting on stuff. I thought that was really cool. We could alternatively do a free-for-all depending on who was interested, right? Because maybe there's going to be a situation where, say, Vik isn't able to or interested in playing in the show match. Like, he might not be available at the time for when we're going to do the grand final, since we would want to do that live anyway. That might be one of those things where it's like, okay, gotcha, we'll just leave that off the table then. Meanwhile, for Nebline, when it comes to the his availability might also be in question, right? And so like it might just be one of those things where we just pick we grab everybody who was eliminated and say, are you interested in joining the show match? And then, you know, if they are, then great, we file them in and we figure out like what formats are available with those players, because Shambler was actually available, but he didn't get back to me in time before Arbuz and Mystery Meat had already confirmed. And so that was one of those situations where like, well, we had three people. I guess maybe we could have done like a 3-way FFA or something. But, you know, that's something that just didn't even occur to me in that moment. So, you know, that could have been something pretty cool if we did like Arbuz, Meat, Shambler, FFA on 3 spawn or more maps, or on the FFA maps that never actually get showcased. Like there's In Twain, there's that we did showcase once on the Fraud of July tournament, because we did get a free-for-all decider. It was pretty epic. And then we had, what else did we have? We have Apep's Lair, and we have Excision, I think it's called. And so, like, these are maps that I've made for, being able to basically have FFAs on. And so I guess there's even Excelsior if you go way back. So yeah, I thought that was some interesting stuff to throw out at you guys. I'll go ahead and take the browser view off so you guys don't have to worry about getting flashbanged by fucking Reddit. Sorry about that, by the way. But yeah, one of the things that I'm definitely keen on doing whenever we get to a point where we can is having more show matches and having more I guess, interaction with some of the players that get eliminated at other points of the in the game. And so that's something that I would like to be able to do, is say, like, all right, you're out of the tournament, but if you're interested, we will have an option for you. And maybe that's actually better than like the tiebreaker idea, because it's up to the player who is eliminated if they want to participate. I think that that's pretty good, because there's going to be some players, like, I can imagine a more, like, for example, I don't think I'm calling anybody out when I say this. I can imagine that even like Hit 'em Up himself might be like, what? I got eliminated and you want me to play again in a serious manner? Fuck that. I'm not doing that. Like, I could see him doing that, right? Or saying that, and he'd be totally within his rights to do that, right? I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying some people are like, once they're eliminated, they're already maybe upset, tilted, not interested. Hit 'em Up hasn't had to deal with that because he just keeps winning. And so that's probably one of the reasons why it feels safe to say something like that, because who the fuck is going to eliminate Hit 'em Up? I don't know, man. Watch back this particular section when he gets eliminated in Acropolis 2, and maybe you can throw some egg on my face as a result. But I don't think he's gonna. I think he's winning everything from here on out. It's just my view. But yeah, I figured I would use this opportunity to segue out, actually, into some discussion about the game flow of Cosmonarchy, because when it comes to the way that the game has worked for a while now, particularly with people like Hit 'em Up, Top Ramen, Neblime, I would say Arbuz Budesh gets thrown into this as well. And sure, that's the top 4 from the tournament, but like just the top echelon of players who are competing. It seems like we've arrived at a meta where we typically have like, a ridiculous number of workers, no matter what race you're talking about. You got crazy numbers of worker queues pumping out workers every rotation. And that worker count, even though you'll grossly oversaturate a base with like 60 guys on minerals and more than half of them aren't doing anything, that's not really super punished because of the issue of supply, right? And so one of the things that we, Veek7 and myself, both kind of agreed about is like, okay, well, the worker counts are pretty high, but the army sizes aren't so high. And you're often spending a lot of time on one base, especially in a situation where you don't feel safe. So how do we encourage expanding without it being one of those things where one basing is like outlawed? I wouldn't want to outlaw it, right? I think Veek is a little bit more ambivalent about that, but I personally would not want to outlaw one basing, and I'm sure if you asked him, he'd probably say something similar. And so, like, I look at that and I think to myself, okay, what are we going to do about the idea of like the worker counts being too high? Because that was something that I personally thought was a big problem, mostly because like you would oversaturate a base, but it wouldn't really do anything. I don't think that you should be like, your workers should start to become dumber when you have too many of them on there, although I guess you could do that. It's just something about that seems wrong. I was more so thinking about how, like, in Brood War or StarCraft 2 even, if you oversaturate, well, there's a max supply limit. So you can't go beyond 200 supply. Therefore, if you build too many workers, you're going to have a weaker military. I don't like that dynamic because I don't really like supply in an RTS in general, but that is something that is indubitably true about like why you don't see 100 plus workers in most Brood War games, for example. So if you're going to get to that point, in my opinion, it would be great if you were at like 12 bases or something crazy. And that's why you have, I mean, what is 12 times 21 is like the new sort of number that we've reached. So we do 12 times 21 is 252. So yeah, that would be a number of workers that I have seen before, but they're usually not on 12 bases, right? They're usually on like 8 or even less than that. And they've got a ridiculous number of workers, right? 250 workers or something. And then they have like 50 military units. And it's like, what the fuck's going on here? So that's not my favorite thing. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to change for sure, is like reducing the need for a large number of workers, particularly early on in the game. And we'll talk about like how we're going to do that, or how we have done that on the version that's now available for testing in the next episode. But these are just like laying out in this episode of Prototype. I just want to lay out some of the things that I feel I've taken umbrage with, I'm not really a fan of when it comes to Cosmonarchy at a high level so far as we have seen, is that yes, we've achieved some element of understanding of like what's probably going to happen. Like there's not anything that's super crazy is going on. Like I actually think that even though there are some strategies that you can do that aren't super interesting or engaging, or the responses to them are not super interesting and engaging, it doesn't mean that there aren't responses. Like, you could probably freeze the Tyrant's Tale version of Cosmonarchy, and yes, you'd have ridiculously powerful Cyclops that seem a little bit A-movie, and yes, you'd have, like, Eidolons being really abusive and powerful, and, mutating compositions around them and stuff. You'd have like certain Protoss openers and stuff that are really, really strong and like force Terran to do certain things as well. And, like there's this back and forth or whatever, right? And I'm sure there'd even be like a meta that would develop without any changes to the game happening. But I don't think that the responses that you do have access to that we've discovered so far in the meta, and bearing in mind we've been in this meta for a decent amount of time, even though certain compositions were only discovered like on the onset of this tournament. This tournament itself took over like a month and a half to follow through on. So like it was a preparation tournament. It took its sweet time being prepared for and being played. And so as a result, we had a long time relative to some other tournaments to really sink our teeth into this meta and figure out like, okay, what's going on with it and evolve somewhat within it. And some of the core things that always were there were like those massive worker counts and the small army counts. But another thing that was there that kind of showed up a little bit later on were certain strategies like the Cyclops stuff or the Eidolon stuff that felt maybe like very like reasonable, like not very high risk, but pretty high reward. And also like if you don't have the one answer to it or the two answers to it, one of the two answers to it, then you're going to have a really, really bad time and eventually lose. And it doesn't really seem that interactive as a result. And we usually want more than just one answer to exist to a problem like, oh, my enemy has Harakans and Eidolons, or, oh, my enemy has Cyclops and maybe some chaff or something. There probably should be something that's a little bit more distinct with like the way that you can have a couple of different options to attack something, or here's a problem. How do you solve it? Well, it's not much of a solution if there's only one. You know what I mean? It's not very interesting if there's only one solution. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. And so that would be something that I would levy at the current game state that we found, and that's more meta dependent. And you can probably address that. You can definitely address that just through unit adjustments. But the economy definitely seems like it needs adjustments if we want to address the worker count stuff. And so again, you could freeze Tyrant's Tales version and just play that forever, and it would be a functional game. It would be a functional RTS. It would be pretty good. But I think we can do better, and we have already made a large number of changes onto pre-release, and again, we'll talk more about those in a separate episode of this show, but that's something that I wanted to bring up is like, hey guys, we have identified certain things that we don't like, and some of them are compositions which only really have one note, not very interactive answers, and we also have a situation where the game feels like it's very heavily mutated around the spamming of workers, and it doesn't really feel very thoughtful, interesting, etc. And it seems like if you don't engage within that, then you're basically all-inning, and you might not even know you're all-inning. And so that doesn't feel very interesting, I guess. And so that's another thing that we wanted to target. I guess there's like a secondary concern that Vik definitely championed, but the idea of like tech pacing felt a little bit off still, despite the fact that we've made a lot of strides in that department, like bringing the Covenant and the Palladium to tier 1, as well as the Anvil for that matter, and making it so that you can grab that structure, grab those add-ons and stuff without needing the Atlas, meant that you can augment your production as Terran with tier 1.5, and then obviously the Zerg stuff is like, you've got the Nathrok Lake, and you've got the Skithrok Scab, and those were added many moons ago now, but they've kind of settled in, and people have figured out like, okay, yeah, you got tier 1 Bactylisks, you got tier 1 Skithrkors, still, but they're kept behind. They're gated behind that mutation. Tier 1 Athacors still, but also tier and Vorvacors as well, but they're gated behind the structure mutation. That sort of thing is definitely the case for Zerg, and so I don't know. I figured I would throw that out there as like, these are things that we've already been trying to do, but like maybe the tech pacing of Protoss is still a little bit wacky, especially if the economy changes. There's a lot of things that you got to factor in there. Where Protoss has like long been a problem in a way, like it's functional, but it's just like, it's one of those things where when you play as that race, you feel like all the choices can be overwhelming for you, just like they can be overwhelming for your opponent. I'm sure there are Terran players out there going, oh, wow, let me grab my saddest, smallest violin, because you're talking about Protoss players having a hard time. But it is kind of true that like as Protoss, there's so many different options that when you're learning the game as Protoss, it is a little bit difficult to kind of go along a certain track. And I think that is something of a concern. And so if you're in a situation where you have, no tech requirements whatsoever, then it does feel kind of ephemeral, difficult to get your hands on and really understand what's going on. It slips through your fingers kind of deal. And it's hard to really grasp some kind of understanding of how you're supposed to scale up without seeing somebody else do it for you. And I guess in some ways they're the ultimate creativity race, and that you can mix and match and stuff. And on the other hand, from that, it feels maybe a little bit too free form to be super set in stone at any point and difficult. So that was another thing that I guess is worth pointing out. But there's also a lot of concerns that I don't want to dismiss when it comes to changing the economy or changing anything on a deep level. Is that we got to remember that we did achieve something pretty epic with Cosmonarchy already. Again, we're talking about, can we do better? Yes, we believe so. And that's why we're going to be making some changes. But it's worth also noting that, we've kind of put down Chesterton's fence here. We don't want to move it or delete it or reshape it or, whatever, without understanding that there's going to be some knock-on effects that we need to deal with. And that's actually why we've spent so long on pre-release testing through the version and going back and forth, making certain changes and seeing how they do. And then, people like Hit 'em Up and Ramen and Shambler and even like Arbuz and Pr0totype. There's been a lot of players, Smarty Cakes, Game Dominator, aka Dino Man, Gerald Storm, Dead Infested now. There's been a lot of people who've been playing a lot of the games and grinding out those matches and giving their feedback. Shopkeeper Dog, another player that's in that list. Hupsea came back and played a couple of games, I think. That was pretty cool. And so, there's a lot of players who are popping in and playing some matches. Neblime and Jack are even playing again. That's a match made in heaven. I know Hamster's been around. So you got your players. You got them gaming. You got them doing stuff. Bariso's playing. You got everybody playing. And so we're getting a lot of feedback. We're getting a lot of impressions. We're getting a lot of replays to look at and stuff. And that's very, very useful for kind of itemizing what's going on. And so again, we'll talk a little bit about where we end up when I record the next episode this weekend. So stay tuned for that. But that is where we find ourselves when it comes to thoughts about Cosmonarchy's current meta, if you will, the Tyrant's Tale meta. I also very briefly wanted to cover the Tyrant's Tale mission pack format. I think this is an exciting opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the decisions that were reached about the way that the Tyrant's Tale will be told when it comes to the mission pack. So for those who are not aware, Tyrant's Tale as a tournament is being dramatized, mythologized, if you will, with memorializations happening in the form of dedicated maps, where basically you're going to play as one of the top 4 players in basically one mission will be created for every series that was played by that player. And so the Hit 'em Up arc is only going to be the 4 missions because he never dropped to the lower bracket, so he never had to play an extra game. So what Hit 'em Up does is he plays against Veek7 in one mission, he plays against the Shambler in another mission, he plays against Top Ramen in the 3rd mission, and again Top Ramen in the 4th mission. Except there's going to be some changes based on that, where the other players are going to sort of follow along, if you will, as FFA or team games or whatever. And so there's going to be a little bit more going on than just that. But it's that's the premise, if you will. And then obviously Top Ramen will play against Hamster, and then he'll play against Mystery Meat, and then he'll play against Hit 'em Up, and then he'll play against Neblime, and then Hit 'em Up again. So that's like a 5-game set, 5-game arc, 5-mission arc. And then the Neblime arc is kind of the same way, where he does Mystery Meat, and then he does, who did he play after Hamster? And then Shambler, Arbuz, and Top Ramen. And so then we have Arbuz, who played against the Shambler, and then he played against Veek, and then Mystery Meat, and then Neblime. And so that's only a 4-mission arc. So all told, actually, Top Ramen, I think we're skipping the first time he met Hit 'em Up, because one of the things that I wanted to try to do was basically pick a map that I thought was particularly interesting between the series. And for whoever you're playing as, it has to be a map where they win. And Top Ramen did not win a game against Hit 'em Up in the upper final, and so we're kind of skipping over that, and we'll make references to it about how he's reeling from a total defeat or whatever. He didn't. It was just a series of catastrophes or whatever. The alternative would be to pick the one where he seemed to do the best in, but if you win after that, it's like kind of silly because it didn't happen. So we want to be respectful for like the actual legacy of the tournament, I guess, and like how it worked. So that's sort of my thinking on it. And you know, we're still feeling out like how we want to do this kind of thing. Never did a tournament that got turned into lore before. That being said, lore is like kind of a misnomer because I don't necessarily think that these characters that are being made are going to be like canon characters within the setting or whatever. But I could be wrong. Maybe I'll find a way to incorporate them. It really depends on how crazy I go with the writing, right? Ideally, whoever is, like say you are playing, you're as Arbuz and you're playing against the Shambler, super ideally, we would have Arbuz voice act himself. I don't know if he has a microphone, and I don't know if he'd be comfortable doing that. And Shambler voice act himself. I know he has a microphone, and I think he would be comfortable doing that. So these are all like things that we might end up trying to do. But yeah, that's what I got for you when it comes to that. So the other thing that's worth pointing out is that I went around and told everybody who had played in the tournament, I wanted them to pick a faction, but I prioritized the picks based on like how well did you place. So Hit 'em Up chose Futurist Federation because they have the Ally Safe Splash Cyclops is the main reason. He said either that or Upstarts, but I told him that the Futurist Cyclops would be Ally Safe, and he's like, yeah, give me that. And then we had Top Ramen pick the Nidus Trinity because I think just because somebody else recommended it to him, I can't remember. But then he said it would be fitting. Mystery Meat was the next highest placing Terran, and he picked the Hikaton Coalition because they've got Advanced Ahmed, of course. And Hamster ended up with the Golden Republic instead of Upstart. He could only pick that, or the default tech tree was also available. So he, of the three options he had left, he picked the Golden Republic. And other than that, we had Neblime pick the Starbound, and Arbuz picked the Calendric Knights. So that was pretty interesting for the Protoss players. Shambler picked the... I think it was the Gezirith Tendril, yeah. And then we had the Imacrenia Tendril picked by Veek7 because Imacrenia has Infestation. So, of course, he would pick that one. Veek is a big fan of the Ekistra Core and Infestation in general. He feels very epic about it. So, who am I to tell him not to be epic? All right, so that is where we have the notes gone, but I will point out that the reason why I talked about the factions is because the players will be playing as those factions when they make their appearances in the Tyrant's Tale mission pack, and that means that it's also kind of spurring on more faction development, which is kind of funny because the work I'm doing for Tyrant's Tale, the first time you'll be able to actually experience it is in Faction Wars on pre-release. There's already some changes made for things like the Starbound Zealot factional variant and the Futurist Federation Cyclops factional variant. I'm working on the Calendric Knights Ecclesiast factional variant. It might actually be partially implemented, but it's not trainable yet. So that's something I got to do. And then the other one was there's a replacement to the Legionnaire for the Starbound. It's called the Cicadas, but I might call it Cicadas. I'm not sure how I want to pronounce that yet. Cicadas makes me think of cicada, and I don't really want to have something that makes people think of a bug when it comes to Protoss. But Cicadas might be fine as a way to pronounce that. I think it's kind of interesting. It's got the same kind of idea as the Legionnaire in a way that it's an expendable skirmisher unit. However, it has different stats on the physical level. It attacks with a 2x5 with 1 armor pen, so it's different in its attack pattern. And instead of having the teleportation, it has nihilism. Nihilism, the passive of the Vagrant. So I had started to implement that as well, but it's not fully operational yet, I don't believe. At least, maybe it is, I just didn't test it yet, so that's something I got to finish up later on. But that is the update for what's been going on lately. Oh, I did end up pitching a customized... like a different cohort passive as well for the Nidus Trinity, and the cohort replaces the Cyprian for the Nidus Trinity, and they revive once after death in a similar way to how they have the Reclamation stuff, but if they step over... Oh, they have timed life after that revive, but if they step over a corpse, they become permanent again. And, I'm kind of trialing that as an idea. That might end up being a general Reclamation overhaul for the umpteenth time anyway, because I kind of like that, honestly. That's pretty epic. But I don't know. It feels like maybe it's a perfect opportunity to trial stuff like that, since we're going to be customizing one cornerstone for every faction, and the Reclamation cornerstone of Terran is going to be customized by the Nidus Trinity. right now I'm trialing that as a customization there. So we'll see how it goes. But that is a little bit of an idea, a little bit of a throw around there just to let you guys know what's going on. And now it's time to check out what the community of Cosmonarchy has been up to when it comes to the community roundup. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are on to the community roundup. I was talking about how there's a lot of maps to go through. Well, here are some of them. Switching on the browser view here for you guys to check out. This is Sanguis Alteris. It is a V2 map, so a Team FFA map by the Shambler. It has been significantly updated since the last time we saw it. I'm really just showing it for the sake of like posterity because it was updated. I honestly can't remember what the updates were. I think it was the removal of mineral fields in these chokes where the burning Daedalus are, and then maybe the middle got opened up a little bit. I might have played a map on the changed version. It's just hard to tell based on just looking at it what the changes actually were. But, you know, you spawn in these like sort of interior sections, and you've got a front player and a back player, and these Daedalus act as like pseudo walls connecting the closer team spawns, so that you have to go a little bit further around if you want to actually break them. But because they're burning, they have a time limit before they're actually going to be eventually burned down. And of course, you can engage with that by attacking it. Kind of similar to, if anybody remembers, Infinite Velocity 2 and how we had the burning atlases on that map. That was by the Beaver. Shout out the Beaver. Yeah, so just making sure that everybody's paying attention to that sort of stuff. Because if you're playing on this map and you don't expect there to be an attack, well, suddenly there could be. So that is that. As far as I understand, this is going to be the last version of the map for a while. Maybe if we see some more team FFAs and this map gets played, Shambler will have some thoughts on what to change about it. But for the time being, anyway, that is good. That's where we find ourselves there. There's going to be a quartet of maps that I am responsible for, or no, just a trio, I believe, starting with Kickback, but it's not called Kickback, it's called Check Stealer. This was a 4-spawn map here. The start locations weren't yellowified and removed for the secondary players in the screenshot, which is something I should fix at some point. But you've got top left, right, bottom left, and those are the mains. Now, you do have naturals that are in base. However, you'll notice that they have only a geyser and no ridge. I believe in the most up-to-date version, because these screenshots were taken before we removed one mineral field per main and nat, and probably also third in most maps, made it so that you have 7 minerals instead of 8. That's one of those situations where you'll generally speaking see less workers. And again, we'll talk about like the meta changes and what we're doing to the game in order to achieve certain ideas of like changing the balance and stuff, and the gameplay so that it's a little bit less about worker spam. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but for the time being, you can be advised that the resource distribution is a little bit different on this map. But yeah, you've got these two bases over here that are going to be lower yield than an average base, but the trade-off is that they're both right there, right? And so in StarCraft 1, Kickback has minerals that deplete faster, and of course gas that also depletes faster. I did not preserve the mineral depleting faster thing in the Cosmonarchy version in Check Stealer, but I will probably end up experimenting with that at some point, just so that remaining in your quadrant there isn't so potent in many matchups. But I've seen Hit 'em Up play this a lot. He was the one who commissioned it, and so far it's been fairly successful. I'd say this is probably shaping up to be an Empire class map. I was a little bit curious about whether or not I would want to make the middle of the map actually have some height associated with it. Maybe they could be like omnidirectional ramps, or maybe they wouldn't be, but something like converting some of the areas over here into high ground seems like it would be a good idea. I've never seen anybody take the middle base, but it might serve some purposes, and so I suppose it's fine to keep that there. But yeah, when it comes to the cliffs, I'm not 100% sure what we would want to do with that. I guess I could see, there's another map, I think it might be called Pantheon. I'm not 100% sure. In StarCraft 1, in like the current Pro League stuff and the ladder, it is currently available. And the way that they did some of the designs for that was kind of interesting, because they would basically, they had like these quadrants of bases where you'd go up into a very small boxy high ground and then go into an expansion at around like the 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. I think that's where it was anyway, but it's hard to remember the exact layout of the map. I haven't seen it. But yeah, basically it's something like you could imagine if this whole area here from, this cliff where my mouse is to this cliff, and then it extended out to meet this line created by this block of terrain. If that was all high ground and had like one ramp facing north and one ramp facing south, that would be kind of interesting, right? Because if you think about it that way, it's like, okay, yeah, and then we have the way to get into the base being through a ramp facing left, which I think would be kind of interesting, actually. So maybe we'll try that, because that could also be a nice way to add a little bit of high ground for army movement, but have it be relevant to an expansion. And so, yeah, that's just another thing to keep in mind, I guess. But that is Check Stealer, a map by myself, but originally by whoever made Kickback. I can't remember their name anymore, and commissioned by Hit 'em Up. So shout out to Hit 'em Up. Then we have Spinal Tap. This map was Vertebra is the name of the map, and it was ported by myself, and I did so for 3Crow. 3Crow commissioned this one. And I'm liking the way that it's looking overall. It has, the high ground in the middle of the map and stuff with like the ramps and whatnot. It's a 2-spawn map, so you got top right and bottom left. And you've got mineral-only bases over here that's sort of by the high ground. So I'm sure that that'll end up being somewhat harassable. We might need to tweak some exact precise terrain values here and there. This map took a very long time to port because of the tile set stuff, but we did eventually get it operational. And I think it's looking pretty good. So I think we'll probably end up putting this into Empire class as well. Now, whether or not it shows up for Acropolis number 2, I mean, that remains to be seen. But it's passing all of the tests so far when it comes to the way that things are going, and we'll probably end up having at some point in like either maybe like super early October, we'll probably have like an invitational or something where we'll test out the runs here and see what we can do with that. So yeah, it's just some more stuff to think about, but I'm liking the way that the things that I'm seeing here. And yeah, with any luck, we'll get an opportunity to see this one in action. But so far, it seems like it's okay for both macro and for more early game timing oriented attacks. This screenshot does indicate some asymmetry with the water up here, and I'm pretty sure I fixed that already. But if not, it's easy to fix later. But besides that, yeah, I'm pretty sure the screenshot. Oh, again, it has more minerals than the final version ended up having. So when you boot this map up, if you play on pre-release, then everything will make sense when it comes to the economy. And yeah, that is Spinal Tap for you. There you have it. Once again, recommended or requested, commissioned by 3Crow. So shout out to 3Crow. And this map is entirely original. I don't know how you might have been able to tell that, wink. This is Lunatic Fringe, a map by myself. It is an island map, technically. We did see this on the show match for... what was it? The show match for Tyrant's Tale between Arbuz and Mystery Meat, Game 2. We saw this map be played on Massacre. And as it turns out, Massacre Island map is a pretty terrible idea. We didn't have the Nidus respawn mechanic in, but the Niduses connect your main to your natural if you're going to take a natural further out. Obviously, the 4 corners-ish is where your mains are, and then the actual corners are where your in-base natural is, but it has, only a gas, but you've got 2 ridges in the main, so that's like kind of the trade-off, is that you can kind of remain on one base in one area. That's to try to protect you against air, but another thing that protects you against early air is all of the spraiths that are neutral hostile, and those spraiths exist to sort of create pathways in the early stages of the game, because I basically had myself a think. This was commissioned by 3Crow as well, and he wanted me to create a competitive viable island map. And I mean, I gave it my best shot. I have no idea if I succeeded in that or not. But the reason why I went for the spraiths is because I was thinking to myself, one of the things that makes air units so tricky is that there are no pathways for them. So what if I created a way to kind of artificially nudge the air units down a pathway, and then I had the Nidus there for optional ground army movement that obviously can be contested and destroyed. And that is where we ended up in a situation where the spraiths basically act as neutral, hostile pseudo pathways, but the air units obviously, when you think about it, like they can make it through the spraiths. Like the spraiths don't deal that much damage. They've got a lot of range, so that can be kind of annoying. But it's not like a watchdog where it does a ridiculous amount of DPS. So you can, with enough planning and experimentation, you can figure out like avenues where you can fly away. And then like if you have an Anseal as Terran, well then you're fine anyway. So it's pretty good there, and you can destroy them as well in the later game. Some of them can be destroyed with ground units, and some of them have to be destroyed by air units. There's ones in the middle of the map as well. This is mostly, I can't remember why I decided that there should be ones in the middle of the map. I just remember thinking it sounded right or seemed right. So maybe that's also to like further encourage the early air units to only path in certain areas. But either way, it's kind of interesting. I think it's a wacky map. I don't think it'll end up being adopted because it does end up playing very differently on account of being an island map. And I also think that you probably would want, like, I think you would probably end up wanting, I guess because of these, the North and South Islands exist, if you were playing on, say, like your cross spawns or vertical spawns, you could probably do something where even if your Nidus is blown up, you can take the bases over here with a island expand or whatever. Like if you're not playing on fucking Massacre, then that's pretty easy, pretty doable. And even if you are playing on Massacre, you can put down a transport creator pretty easily, especially if you're Zerg. Then you don't even need a production structure for it or anything. So yeah, you just fly over there and start mining. So it's not the end of the world. But when it comes to horizontal spawns and your Nidus gets blown up, I'm actually not really sure what you do because this area is going to be contested, right? And I guess you could try to fly over here, but it's a little bit further away that you won't really be able to use transports to reinforce very elegantly. And I guess you'll have to rely on an air army at that point, but this has less Vespene than over here in the north. So I don't know what to do about that one, but that is an interesting situation to be in. And maybe we'll actually get some people trying to play on it. It'll be around for show matches at least. So there's that. But once again, commissioned by Pr0totype. Shout out to Pr0totype. This is mapped by Jujik. It's not a map by myself. This one is called Near Impact. Originally, it was called Apophis or Apophis. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but he changed the name towards the end there. And so Near Impact is a 2-spawn map, 1v1. It's a full asteroid map, as you can see. The only normal terrain is off in the corners, like waylaid around there and thereabouts. We've got some asteroids over here in the main and in the top left and the bottom right. And the whole terrain is all asteroidy. I think I might have added some doodads for him to place. I don't think these were here until maybe a month ago when he was working on this map at the very beginning. So that's something that I remember trying to add at some point. The crevices here and there are actually totally buildable. So you can build over here, but you can't build on the rocky ground. Maybe the rocky ground is what I added. I added something for this map. I just can't remember what it was. But yeah, the rocky dirt here is not buildable. So the whole middle of the map is not buildable. But a pretty interesting layout. I do think it's pretty easy to set up 3 bases, but at the same time, it can be daunting to get past that. So it was something that happens in 1v1 maps a lot of the time when they're 2-spawn maps, is that it can be sometimes somewhat trivial to take a third, but then really difficult to take a fourth. And then other times it can be really difficult to take a third, but if you successfully take a third, then you can probably pretty easily take your fourth. And I think that kind of map is like Impetus, whereas the other kind of map is like maybe Derelict, or a map like this, right, where you have a situation where you're playing in you're fine to take your third base or whatever, and then it's like, well, my enemy might be able to just contain me. I do like these. I mean, hopefully I can create better blends at some point for this sort of thing, but I do like these little mounds, if you will. They're like hills or something that go one way, and so you can walk up them and then shoot down. You get for cliff advantage. I really like that kind of experimentation, and at some point we'll make tiles that look really good for that, and people will be able to use them, and it'll be great. That's my prediction anyway. And then our last map showcase is a map by The Night Fox. The Night Fox made a map. It's called Hala, Halah. I don't know what that means. It's his first map that he's made for Cosmonarchy. I think it might be his first map he's made for StarCraft 1 in general, like including vanilla, right? But it is a 2-spawn map, and it has your spawns on the top left and in the bottom right, and you've got a bunch of resources on the like inaccessible areas that's specifically there for advanced workers. AI will have a tiz out on this map for sure because of that, but that's okay. And we have the base allocation every now and then. Obviously, one of the key attributes that this map has that you'll probably notice is that you have a ramp into your main, and then you have your bridge into your main. And also, there's not a lot of build space, I guess, in the main area, but that I think was a deliberate design decision. I can't remember if it was, but that has been a subject of conversation on our Discord server anyways. Should we try to have maps with less build space in the mains, but more build space elsewhere? I'm not sure this has the more build space elsewhere part of it, but I guess, you have this area over here in the top right. Anyway, he talked about maybe making it so that the bridges are blocked off at the beginning of the map. And the only thing that I would worry about when it comes to that is I think it would be a great idea in a vacuum, because you don't really want to have to worry about two entrances to your main, least of all entrances where you worry about your ability to move around, like your ability to, like, you don't even have cliff advantage on the bridge, right? So that's like a big concern. So I would say that that would make a lot of sense. But the other thing that you got to worry about is that when you place something inaccessible in Brood War, and this is not sadly still true for Cosmonarchy, I don't know if we'll ever be able to fix it. When you move away from, like, when you try to order units to move, they don't calculate structures or other units. Like, structures are just units as far as the pathing is concerned. They don't calculate them differently than normal units. So they look at the structure and they think, oh, maybe that unit will move out of the way or something. And they'll just try to path through it instead of around it. So that is a problem for obvious reasons. And that's something that maybe we'll be able to fix at some point, but we are not sure about that yet. And we're busy on the technical side. We're busy with the iScript extender anyway. So when it comes to stuff like that, yeah, it's a little bit dangerous, right? And so I do think that this is like right in the middle. Like, unless you built your production down here, then it probably wouldn't matter. But if you were to try to like click to the middle of the map from your main, 100% of the time they're going to try to go to the bridge. And if that bridge isn't opened up, then you're going to have to like click around, which is something that, well, especially since the Night Fox mostly comes from StarCraft 2, as far as I know. I think he would just absolutely hate that out of his own map. So yeah, I think he would be able to be sympathetic to what I'm saying anyway. But yeah, shout out to the Night Fox for making a map anyway. It's pretty cool stuff that we see more people making maps. So I am appreciative of that. So up next, we of course have the coffee questions. I have now enabled the coffee thing in the bottom left. Check it out. If you want to donate to project development, help fund more cool stuff in Cosmonarchy, maybe donate at a high amount of money and request something. I mean, obviously talk to us beforehand so we agree on the money amount. Commission something, a map like 3Crow and Hit 'em Up have been doing. You can absolutely do that. You can sign up on our coffee page, either monthly or one-time donations. Everything helps, and I appreciate it. Our first question is going to be from none other than Jesse. He is a cool dude, and I appreciate him quite a bit. He asks about game design in a hard sci-fi setting. What are your thoughts on hard/realistic sci-fi, for example, The Expanse, as a setting for games? If you were to design an RTS in that kind of setting, what would it be like? Well, Jesse, I have not watched The Expanse, and so I really don't know what kind of hard sci-fi it is. Like, is it hard sci-fi where everything is accounted for, but none of it is like expressly told to you? Like, does it explicitly tell you everything so you know everything is accounted for? That's the kind of thing that usually rubs me the wrong way about hard sci-fi. Usually the reason why I'm not a fan of hard sci-fi is because it kind of, to me, and I know this is not true for everybody, so this is a purely like, I'm not saying that this is like an objective takedown of hard sci-fi. This is just like what I don't like about it is, I feel like it misses the point of fiction in the first place, because what it's doing is it's saying, hey, let's take this premise that has an element of believability to it, but let's enforce the current understanding we have of the laws of physics and other such things to account for, like the believability of everything so that it plays out exactly like we would expect it to play out. The problem is manifold there, but one of them, the issues that immediately comes to mind, is that I said the current understanding we have of physics. Well, I mean, if you do that, then eventually we learn more about physics and suddenly your thing is null and void anyway, right? Like, that kind of corrupts the entire premise of what you're trying to get at. From my standpoint, as the author of many different settings, I'm the world builder behind them, and I understand how they work. And so, like, you could argue, and I don't think people would generally do this, but you could argue that all of my settings are hard sci-fi already because everything does actually play out according to some internal logic. It's just that I've determined what that internal logic actually is. I've decided what the laws of physics account for and allow for. And that's a lot easier to do when you accept that you do not have all of the answers of our current laws of physics, right? So maybe I'm misunderstanding what hard sci-fi actually is, but in my experience, it's always been project our current accepted laws of physics understanding out into the future, into another place entirely usually, and tell a story based on that respects our current laws of physics. And so, that might be really interesting if people are into our current laws of physics, like they really know about it and are knowledgeable about it, and then they work from what they know. That would be a reason why I would explicably understand why somebody would want to do something in a hard sci-fi setting. That's cool. But the main thing that just confuses me about that is like, wait a second, what's going on with your like what about if you find something else out? Then it like kind of invalidates your thing, right? And I don't know. I almost feel like it misses the point of fiction to tether this thing that is so far away from, like, all of my stuff is like human removed kind of, or if it's got humans in it, it's like many evolutions later of humans, right? And so a lot of things would be different, especially technologically speaking. And so when you think about it from that perspective, it's kind of irrelevant what humans think about the sci-fi. I almost said what humans think about the laws of physics and stuff, and what natural law actually is, and like you just decide as the author what it is, right? But if I was going to make an RTS game out of our current understanding of physics as I understand them, that's another part where it's like kind of flawed because I don't claim to understand our current laws of physics. I'm not up to date with them the same way that an actual physicist is. Then I guess what I would say is, if I was going to design an RTS with that setting, I don't know what I would be able to get away with because, again, I'd have to do a lot of research, and I need to figure out exactly what your laws of physics allow for, like what our laws of physics allow for. Um, hmm. Maybe what I would try to do is to get around the travel problem in terms of FTL. I would have to make it so that the basic unit of time is not like a second, but it's a light year, or, well, that's not a unit of time. Well, I guess it kind of is, but like that's not really what it is. It's a measure of distance, obviously. So what would I say? It's however long it takes. Like it would be like a solar year, right? Like in the solar system. Maybe that's like the base unit of time, or a solar month, or something like that. Or each second is a day. Whatever the number actually allows us to, so that we can have like transport and stuff. The only problem is that's what accounts for like the grand spectrum view of things, but it's not really what accounts for like individual battles, which would be a lot more. I don't know. I actually don't even really know what warfare would look like if we adopted our current understanding of the laws of physics. Because in order to make something in hard sci-fi, I almost have to make it pseudo-contemporary, because we're going to find out more stuff about the laws of physics later on, right? In fact, I imagine maybe that's even what happens in something like The Expanse, because as far as I think The Expanse has some, not FTL, but like travel. The Expanse is either. No, I was thinking the Orville for some reason. That's the Star Trek thing. The Expanse must be that one where you have like people who live on the moon, and people who live on Mars, and people who live in Jupiter moons and stuff, like Titan, I guess. Okay, so if we were going to do something like that, then yeah, I guess it would have to be kind of contemporary and kind of be like, yeah, here's what we like. Everything is exactly as we currently understand it. Now what? I'm a little stumped. What kind of RTS would I be able to make under those circumstances? I think you'd probably do something kind of like what The Expanse did, where you make it so that the locales are like colonized areas, and maybe like internal, like underground colonies and stuff as well. Like I imagine people would take shelter in Mars, and like within the crust of all of these like habitable, loosely I say habitable planets or planetoids, and say like, okay, let's dig in there, let's set up shop there. And so like, I guess the setting becomes a little bit more flavorful than it becomes limiting. And by that I mean like we would have our setting be set in, for example, say we're in like the underground caves and stuff of Mars, and it's where humans have set up shop and made settlements. And it's like, okay, now you've got these Martian colonies, and while they're underground, they go to war over resources and other such things, and they're different factions and stuff. And then above ground, maybe they try to like run up and grab like relief packages that have been sent there by Earth or some other like human settlement. And there could be like wars over the landing pads. But like again, if you're going by hard sci-fi, everything has to be like super. little explosions and stuff can really heavily destabilize the technology, and then suddenly you've got like Martian dust all over. Not the same thing as moon dust, but like the sand that never fucking stops sticking to you and stuff and can like dehydrate you and drown you almost. Yeah, that's the kind of shit that you'd have to watch out for. And so like your armor needs to be really good, and like the whole idea would be like only the elite troops can be going to the surface or something. So maybe like surface level would be a tier 3 thing that you could access as like another map, but everything else would be like within the crust of the planet, almost like a reverse version of Armies of Exego, where you have uh, the game, right? It starts off on the surface level, and then you go into the caves after as a sub level. At some other point, it can be fast or slow depending on the game and depending on the map. But that would be one thing. And then you have like the inverse of that in this, where you start in the underground and then you scale up your technology to the point where you can go up there in a reinforced state. I still think we'd probably end up being a little bit fast and loose with some of the rules as far as the materials go, because an RTS is kind of hard to believe the nuts and bolts part, unless you just buy into like cloning and stuff. And at that point, you can explain cloning in hard sci-fi. It's just, it doesn't feel very satisfying. I don't know how else to say that, but it feels like almost like you're making a cop out anyway. That's my own bias, perhaps, but hopefully the question was somewhat enlightening, or the answer was somewhat enlightening. That's probably what I would start with, is like pick a spot that's not Earth, or maybe it could be Earth as well, and it's like after some climate catastrophe, even though that seems increasingly unlikely, and just see it where we go with that, as like, fighting over territories, and like what kinds of interesting struggles do you get out of adhering to our current understanding of the laws of physics, but still imagining that we eventually colonize different parts of the solar system. So I guess that's it. That's my answer to the question. Up next, we've got Myrian, who asks, have any of your future gameplay or mechanical plans for commercial RTS games been shifted or altered as a result of the experience gained working with Cosmonarchy? Well, Myrian, I absolutely say yes to this question. Essentially, the question was, and still is, like, Cosmonarchy was a test bed for a lot of our ideas. We practiced and guessed, and they were educated guesses in some ways, but we still guessed at what would be interesting and compelling as far as gameplay goes. Like, one of the things that I think Cosmonarchy showed me is that if you want a really expansive, sizable unit roster, like 50 units per race, I think you need to allow the acquisition of those units in different ways than Cosmonarchy does it, in order to be as good as you can be. I'm not planning on changing the way that tech is acquired per se in Cosmonarchy in such a way that would correspond to what I'm saying now. But what I'm getting at is basically like, if instead of 10 units per tier, or more than that, if you're talking about 50 units across 3 tiers on average, instead of what is 50 divided by 3 is 16.6. So instead of about 17 units per tier, you had maybe max 10 units per tier, but you had 5 tiers. I think that would be a lot better. And again, tiers in this case are not necessarily so cut and dry as, oh, I built the tier 2 tech node and therefore I get tier 2. That doesn't need to be the way that it is for every race, or maybe even any race. It can be a little bit more step laddery, where you have I don't know, like you can maybe customize your stuff. Like something Veek always tried to say was peaking your tech a little bit, which would be like, if you're the quintessential example he would often give is if you could go for like stockade into fulcrum and then get like 2 siege tanks really early on. The corresponding version of that would basically be like, if your tier 2 production lets you build siege tanks cheaper or faster, maybe. I'm not really sure what that would look like. That was just something he would say a lot of the time, is like, if you could peak that for a timing, that would be really cool. And I can see where he's coming from in essence, right? Like I can look at that and say like, okay, yeah, when it comes to dealing with the size of the tech trees, if they were spaced out a little bit more, but were acquired deliberately, and that would help with some tech pacing issues, but it would also allow you to have expansive tech trees while still making it a deliberate choice to acquire a bunch of them. As of right now, when you build a gateway, you get access to 5 units, right, for the Protoss. And that's cool, but maybe it should be something a little bit different. Maybe you should get access to 3 units from the gateway and then have to augment the gateway and somehow to get access to the other two. And again, we're not going to change Cosmonarchy in this way, but that would be a thing that we could consider doing in a sense that would allow you to more deliberately customize your tech, sort of like what happens in StarCraft 1 or StarCraft 2 already, like the Dark Shrine unlocks the Dark Templar in StarCraft 2. But stupid names aside, I feel like that's really boring to only unlock one unit. So it would probably be more like how the Zerg work in Cosmonarchy, where you evolve a node to unlock 2 more units, or you make a node to make 3 units, or something like that. Except you're doing something like that, but on a per production structure basis, or maybe as an aura around empowering a bunch of structures, or whatever the case may end up being, if it's just going back to having tech structures in general. I'm not against having tech structures. I am a little bit against having them for Protoss from a thematic standpoint, but I could see it working out. It's just like one of those things where you have to decide where your line is and what you want to accomplish with it. So I would say that one distinct plan that has been changed as a result of this observation for tech is I look at Cosmonarchy and I think to myself, the tech trees are pretty cool. They're pretty expansive. They give you a lot of options, and you need to learn all of those options. So it's kind of hard for a new player to grasp with all of the things. So we could probably improve the new player onboarding while also making it so that it's a bit more deliberate in the way that you acquired new tech, new unit options. And that would mean that you would spend a little bit less time setting up for all of those acquisitions and a little bit more time going from instead of unlocking 10 units at once, you would unlock 3 units and then 2 units and then 3 more units and then 2 more units. And I guess you could call it like paradigm for how you think about it, right? So it would be fragmenting and splitting the tech tree across more tiers and more separate acquisition points. That's definitely something that I've been thinking about. And I also think, on a separate note, the idea of having 100 units per race as per Cosmonarchy Retail, aka Zabalba RTS, whatever we call that, that's a little bit of a far-fetched plot, I think, because as much as I like that number, I like that idea of having such a deep tech tree that you don't have a lot of, there's that many units and there's so many things to learn, and you'll almost never use all 100 units in a game, and that's fine. And that's if you ever did, that would be so fucking epic. If it was an organic way to do it, the game designer's dream come true almost. But I think there's a hard ceiling on how complex a game can be when it comes to unique unit IDs and unit types and compositions and stuff, that 50 is probably approaching that hard limit, in my opinion. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking from what I've seen. And so, yeah, I would definitely say that you could just think of this as reining in the tech trees in a way that allows you to engage with them more meaningfully in the early stages of the game, but also in terms of deliberately augmenting which units you can make for your composition. So I would say that is a valid answer to the question, and I hope that it was insightful. We've got up next Enozlliks' question. He asks, what would you rather deal with? A zombie apocalypse, alien invasion, or nuclear disaster, assuming you were able to survive somehow? This is an interesting question. So I was thinking about this when I was writing this question down to answer later. And the first thought that occurred to me was zombie apocalypse, for sure. Because I almost thought that the zombie outbreak will begin, and then the government will fix everything because they've got a ton of black ops and fucking crazy ass taxpayer funded military stuff. So the one thing I can expect my government to do somewhat competently is nuke the problem. And if I'm still there, okay, great, I'm here, I'm hanging. And if I'm not, then oh well, they got me with the blast. The problem is then I thought about it some more, and apocalypse does mean it's over for the government part. And you'd have to basically rebuild, right? So, I guess alien invasion might be the most flexible one where I can wordsmith my way out of it. I don't think of myself as that much different, and I certainly don't think of myself as superior to the average person or to the average Joe or the average one that I know. But I would say that I could offer something interesting to the aliens as a writer, as a fiction fiend, as someone who thinks a lot about stuff like that. And so maybe I could learn about them or talk with them. And if they were just trying to kill everybody and enslave everybody, then well, that's probably like, I feel like that's probably the easiest one to deal with because either we win the war or we don't. And so, yeah. Um, I guess I'll pick that one because nuclear disaster does sound like a disaster. And, well, I guess nuclear disaster is different than. I assume what he meant was like nuclear war, but nuclear disaster kind of makes me feel like Fukushima, and those are always overblown and not as big of a deal as they seem. So maybe that would be the secret pick there. I'd say I avoid zombie apocalypse because that means that the government has failed to contain the problem. And I would avoid, I probably want to avoid nuclear disaster because if it's actually like nuclear war fallout, then, I mean, the planet's going to have a hard time with that anyway. So, like, if you look up how the giant volcano eruptions and stuff have at one point, like, almost cause a mass extinction of including humans, like that was really bad. And so I feel like a nuclear disaster is going to be about the same. So when it comes to that, I don't want to be involved in that one for sure. So yeah, I'll take alien invasion for 500 and appreciate all the support, homie. So we have Lucifirius asking the next question. What does your ideal, reasonably achievable living situation look like? So I would say I would want a room, like an office room for my work that I would occupy for streaming and for developing and for stuff like that. And that would be separate from my bedroom, but probably close enough, like maybe across the hall from it or something. I would be um, presumably living with a lady who I would eventually marry and eventually have kids with. So I guess the house would have to be somewhat, and it would have to be a house, I would imagine. And that is achievable, even though obviously the prices keep going up. That's I recently moved to an area of my state that is a lot cheaper housing costs, and so it's opened my eyes to what is actually possible. So anyway, definitely achievable. So I would say have a house. In that house, have an office room and a bedroom, and a guest bedroom that could later be converted into a kid's room or something, right? And start a family and all that shit, right? And then make enough money off of my game sales and my other stuff that I can provide for whatever needs to be provided for. I think that that's a little bit harder to imagine, but it is possible. So I would say that is achievable. And like whatever I can't make up from that, hopefully we can band together, and like my wife and I in this idealized analogy could band together and make that happen anyway. And so, yeah, I'd say something like that, right? Obviously, I'm not going to give you the whole ideal floor plan of my house, but I just think it's important to separate the work from the home kind of thing, the work from the bed in particular. So having that in separate rooms is a really good idea, but still having the office be somewhat private there would be nice. I guess there'd need to be some kind of rec room for my wife as well, for that matter. So I guess we would need 2 different rooms like that. So yeah, I guess that's probably what I would try to do. And hopefully that would be in a neighborhood that's walkable, that's like enjoyable to take walks in and hikes in and stuff like that for outdoorsy time. Yeah, so that's a pleasant thing to imagine, and I appreciate the question, Lucy. The Shambler asks our penultimate question: how would the pagan protagonist fare if plopped into other major FPS settings? And he lists Doom, Halo, Half-Life, etc. Well, Pagan is the FPS that I've been working on and off when it comes to like the GZ Doom engine. And if we go to fraudsclub.com/pagan, we can find ourselves essentially the primordial force of nature. And so the thing is that the world of Pagan fuels the character, like the protagonist. And so in some ways the protagonist has to be linked to the factions there and the artifacts there and all of this other stuff. So that is kind of difficult to achieve if I'm just isolating the force of nature and putting him into these other settings. He'd probably just turn into a lifeless husk and no longer have any power because he's given fuel by the world that he exists within. But if we somehow were to bring his fuel with him, I I would say that there's multiple answers to this question, and it depends on how far along the maker, in this case, which is the name of the protagonist, it depends on how far along the maker is in his quest to achieve his sort of reintegration, if you want to call it that. So, when we think about like a quick description of what happens in Pagan is return to godhood as the maker, a primordial force of nature that has languished in ancient history. Face the boundless agents of myriad factions, all hostile to one another and to you. Employ instruments of mythical warfare fit only for a god. Reclaim your spirit and commence the cosmos once more. So reclaiming your spirit is really important, and that's where it goes back to like the environment that he's a part of. And so the maker does require that environment. And so if he's like maker at the beginning of the setting, but still given some animus through the power that he finds very early on, like the first weapon kind of thing, I think he'd be roughly comparable to the like Doom Slayer guy, the Doom guy. Doom, like Slayer is from the new Doom things, right? Doom guy would be roughly comparable to the maker if they both had just gotten the shotgun or whatever, right? Like that. Well, the maker doesn't have a shotgun, but like the first weapon that you acquire. I think they're roughly comparable. I really don't know what Doom guy is supposed to be because he does seem pretty hardy for a human. I have no idea what the hell is going on in the new Doom reboot stuff, so I'm not really going to address that, but I don't know. He's more powerful than the average man for sure. He's somewhat like of a super soldier type character, I guess. So I guess he'd be somewhat comparable to Master Chief when it comes to that. However you stock Master Chief up compared to Doom Guy, I guess is like the answer to that question initially. Obviously in Half-Life, like, I guess if he's talking about like plopped into the settings. So I'd say the maker would be able to complete the Doom campaign. He would probably be able to complete the Halo campaign without issues. He would fucking massacre the Half-Life campaign because Gordon is not really that different than an average person, except for the fact that he doesn't fucking talk. And he's in a reinforced armor, right? I think that's like the main reason why he lives through all that shit. Or maybe he's like fucking chosen by G-Man. I don't know. I think Maker would just punch G-Man in his stupid head. Whether or not that would actually work, because obviously G-Man is some weird, unknowable entity, is another thing coming. But I would say that I don't think there's like major FPS setting out there where the protagonist is any different in terms of power levels to, like, I would say out of the ones that Shambler name dropped, the Maker is more powerful, especially once he gets going on the charge, because like he's able to like reshape the entire universe basically once he's super powerful, right? Like that's how he made it to begin with. That's why he's the Maker. So obviously his ultimate power is like indescribable. But when it comes to this sort of thing that Shambler's asking, I would say as long as the Maker has some of his vitality left, he can probably complete those campaigns. I think maybe the Halos would be the hardest ones. Like the first 3 Halos might be the hardest ones for him, because I think Doom wasn't so crazy, and Half-Life also was probably the easiest one. So yeah, I don't know. I'll throw that out there because I don't really know how the technology of the Halo ones would stack up. But there you go. That's the answer to Shambler's question about the Pagan's protagonist in other FPS settings. And our final question comes from 3Crow. How has your mapping mindset evolved over time? Can you describe any shifts in tendencies or patterns as you make maps now compared to when you started making content for Cosmonarchy? And lastly, what's your favorite map commission? Well, I can answer the last one first. I'll say I think the most successful, commission has been Rage Slave, because that's the one that has had the most exciting games on it, and it's been in the Empire class pool. but I want to say that like it was really satisfying to finish the Spinal Tap commission because that took so fucking long to make, and the fact that people have said that it has led to some interesting games, and I've seen some interesting games on it, is rewarding because it means that it wasn't a waste of time, right? Um, I would say I think the kickback port check stealer was like, it didn't take very long to do, and I mostly spent most of the time that I spent on it was like tile placements to make it look pretty, make it look Cosmonarchy-ified, and so that was like, that felt pretty good. Abiogenesis I think looks pretty nice, although it needs detailing and stuff. But I would say that one was satisfying to put together. So I'll give you like a couple of answers for like one of the things that I like about them, but I would say Rage Slave probably has to be my favorite because it has had the most memorable moments so far in competitive Cosmonarchy. So that one was commissioned by Hit 'em Up as a port of Neo Rush Hour. I'll also throw out Endpoint, also commissioned by Hit 'em Up as a port of R Point. Endpoint is really cool. I think I'm probably going to add some high ground every now and then, but I feel like it's a map that could also conceivably work out as an Empire class map. I just need to see a couple more games on it, and if anybody has any negative thoughts about it, I would also love to hear those. How has my mapping mindset evolved over time? Well, I guess an easy way to think about that is that I started off exclusively making campaign maps, then I delved into a couple of UMS maps, and then I also started making melee maps, and now I make Cosmonarchy maps, which are some weird combination of, I mean, definitely a lot of melee stuff, but also like the campaign maps are like a weird combo of melee and campaign style maps. So they're very melee focused, is one way to put it. Like in terms of the gameplay that they try to reward or emphasize. And so, yeah, that's, I think, really cool. I feel like overall, when it comes to building up a case for how the mindset has shifted. I guess like what melee gameplay, what making melee maps has taught me is that you can have like a great idea on paper, but you need to see how it plays out in practice, and that execution matters so much more than your idea. You can have a simple idea executed really, really well, and it can be super satisfying to play and create really good moments. And you can have a really cool looking idea, very high concept, very great on paper, and it makes a lot of sense. And then, depending on how you communicate it, how it's executed, it can fall flat really fast. So, just some thoughts about that, I guess. And I would, I'd echo that design in campaigns as well. I would say that there were specific shifts which occurred compared to when I started making content for Cosmonarchy to now. Like there's some like micro decisions I've made in terms of making the maps where it's been like, oh, hey, don't put too much nor too little negative space or buildable space behind resource lines. Because of the fact that you won't be able, either it'll be drop city if it's too much, and if it's too little, it'll be too hard to defend from air. Like there's like little things like that I learned and internalized over the course of making a lot of maps. But I would say, and there's other things that like, there's not really a good way so far as I've tried, and I've tried many different ways, and I'll probably try more ways to make a map where there's multiple entrances into the main and it not being overwhelming for the player who's on the defensive. So that's like one thing for sure. But then there's like, yeah, there's a ton of like little things where like when I've made High Water, I worked really hard on the visuals of it and it looked really good. And I think people enjoyed watching games on it, but nobody seemed to enjoy playing on it. That was like a big shift when I realized that like everything was being checked off except for the experience the players themselves had on it because of the open mains to drops and stuff like that, where you had it like basically air became really disproportionately powerful because the bulk of the mains would be aimed at impathable terrain, which meant that like in order to rotate your army towards the middle of the map, you had to kind of go around, you had to go like towards the corner of the map that you spawned in, away from everything else, and then take a right or left, and then work around, right? And so the Redux version of High Water helps to alleviate that a little bit with the second ramp, but then you've got 2 entrances into your main, even though one of them is still pretty far away. And so it just didn't end up working out too well. And that was another thing where it was like, okay, like I've got to pay attention to how it feels to play. And this is why I would never co-sign a map like Nemesis or 76 or any of these like really wacky maps that are in or Troy, right? Like these maps that are in StarCraft 1. I would never co-sign putting that into a tournament map pool. For the same reason I wouldn't really co-sign putting Main Street in a tournament map pool. Like maybe I would think about doing something like that as a joke and it would be funny. And in that sense, it's like, because it's such an asinine map to play on, but it's for a funny haha moment, you can say, oh, okay, I can do that. Like as the player, I don't hate that because it's just silly for one game. And the stakes aren't like tournaments on the line or whatever. Whereas like the tournaments are actually on the line when you play on 76 in fucking ASL season 13 or whatever that was. Like that's insane. Who would want to do that? And it turns out nobody, because those maps are fucking insane. And like, I don't know, just having the shift of when I was really considering the end user, like the player experience, not just the spectator experience combined with the map making and game design or game designers experience. Like looking at it from that perspective, it's like, oh yeah, it's really cool that they like had to play around how the map was designed. But if the map is designed in a way that's not very fun to play around, well, maybe it's not so good. So I guess that would probably be the main thing I would say. And with that, we're pretty much done here. Hopefully that was a solid answer to 3Crow's question. I would love to have been able to point to very specific shifts in my thinking, but I can't really think of anything in particular. Besides, like, I remember the moment about High Water. I remember about Sideshow. Something kind of similar happened where it seemed like a great map from spectators POV, but then like some people had really harsh things to say about it that were from their perspective of actually playing on it they didn't appreciate. And I'm fine hearing the harsh criticism, obviously. It's just like I hadn't really been considering it from their point of view. So I guess you could kind of combine that. And then I think the changes to Sideshow made it a lot more playable in that respect, a lot more fun to play, maybe would be a better way to say it, without sacrificing the good parts of the spectator experience. And I wasn't really able to do that same thing with High Water. And now they're both, you know, in the bloodbath folder. So it's fine. It's all good. And that brings us to the show outro. That is pretty much where we wrap things up for this episode of Prototype. I will have another episode out I was going to say tomorrow. I meant later on this week, recording it on Saturday for all you fine coffee donators, and then jumping it into the public view on Sunday. That's the current plan. We'll try to keep to that schedule going forward so you guys can feel somewhat like, oh yeah, there's a lot of stability going on here. Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, hopefully that works out anyway. That's what I got for you for now. Anyway, that's it for me. Take the coffee page away now, but remember you can donate. And shout out to all of our homies for setting us up for a $1,000 tournament for Acropolis number 2. It's going to be by far the biggest tournament we've ever done when it comes to prize pool, and probably when it comes to signups as a result of that. Shout out to Neblime and Biddy B for that. And we'll be back pretty soon to talk about the tournament that's coming, the changes that are coming, and many more things that are coming, like even perhaps the iScript extender? ? See you guys soon.